According to Stats Canada, 82% of recent homicide victims were killed by someone they knew. There is a general rule when investigating murder for police to start with those closest to the victim. Incidents involving strangers are much more likely to strike fear into the population and to increase anxiety about crime, especially when they happen in our own home, a place where we should feel safe. On September 27, 2017, when Dianna Mah-Jones failed to show up for her shift, her co-workers were concerned. Neither Dianna or her husband Richard were answering their phone, and it was unlike her not to call someone if she was going to be late or absent from work. One of Dianna's colleagues would go to the couple's home in Vancouver's Marpole neighborhood, and what he discovered was beyond horrific. Dianna and Richard lay dead inside the house, brutally murdered. The randomness of the crime confused police, friends, and family of the victims, as the couple was beloved by many. But after an intense police investigation, a strange suspect with a strange name and even more bizarre motive would be arrested for the crime. This is the case of the Marpole murders. Located on the Fraser River, Marpole is one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city. About 24,000 people live in the area, which acts as a gateway into Vancouver for visitors flying in and out of the Vancouver International Airport. Living in the Marpole neighborhood were 64-year-old Dianna Mah-Jones and her husband Richard, who was 68 years old. Dianna worked as an occupational therapist at the G.F. Strong Rehabilitation Center. She worked for the Health Authority for 35 years and was much loved by her colleagues, and was named British Columbia's Healthcare Hero in 2017. Her colleagues would describe her as the heart of the inpatient team at GF Strong. She was praised for her ability to think outside the box, and was even credited with helping to invent unique rehab tools. She designed a latex collar for a woman with muscular dystrophy and a wooden pulley-operated feeding tower for a man who needed to eat while standing. Dianna was dedicated to her job and was known to test some of her rehab techniques on her husband Richard Jones, who had a physical disability himself, and used a walker for assistance when walking around the neighborhood. Friends would say that Dianna had a sense of adventure and a passion for dancing, and remember her as a warm and caring person with a good heart. On September 27, 2017, Anthony Purcell, who worked alongside Dianna by providing equipment to some of her patients, stopped by her house because Dianna had not shown up to work that day. She hadn't called in sick, and no one at work could contact her. When Anthony arrived, he noticed a hatchet with blood on it and a knife located near the front pathway of the Mah-Jones residence. He would then go to the back door, where he saw bloody footprints on the back step. Here, he would notice that the screen door to the house was closed, but the main door was open. He would call out to the couple, but received no response. So Anthony walked through the back door of the house, where he found a large amount of blood all over the kitchen. He would immediately walk back out of the house and call 911. Constables Phil Enns and Peter Swan of the Vancouver Police Department responded to the call. As they entered, they noticed the door showed no signs of tampering. It didn't look like it had been kicked in and showed no signs of a break-in. Inside, the kitchen was full of grocery bags, some that were still full and some that were knocked over on the floor, showing signs of a struggle. Police would also find the grocery receipt that was dated from the evening before. It looked as if Dianna had been attacked just as she arrived home from grocery shopping. There was blood all over the walls and floors of the kitchen and living room. A piece of twine was tied to one of the legs of a kitchen chair, and a large amount of blood was on the floor close to that chair. Police would follow a bloody trail inside the home that led down the hallway to the bathroom. When officers got to the bathroom door, they saw it was closed, and they could hear water from the shower running. When Officer Swan opened the door, he was overcome with steam, and his first observation was the outline of what appeared to be a human body. Richard Jones was on his back, and Dianna was on top of him. The water was running, and the handheld shower head was on Richard's face. It was clear that both victims were deceased. Outside on the path leading up to the house, police found an orange Starford knife as well as a hatchet. There were bloody footprints down the back staircase and blood droplets that led down the path to the street. Inside the house, there were no fingerprints that didn't belong to the victims, but there were what appeared to be blood transfers that suggested the killer had worn gloves. Inside the kitchen, police also found a blood-stained baseball cap. The keys to the couple's white Kia Soul were missing, as well as the vehicle itself. Also missing were the victims' wallets. However, none of their bank or credit cards were used after 7:51 p.m. on September 26th, when Dianna went shopping at Costco. Nothing else in the house, though, appeared to be missing, with the exception of some costume jewelry. Computers, electronics, and jewelry were all left behind, including a watch and diamond ring that Dianna was wearing. The Jones residence was then examined by forensic evidence technicians. The largest pools of blood in the house were located in the kitchen and in the bathroom where the bodies were found. Dr. Matthew Ord, an expert in forensic pathology, would perform the autopsies. He determined that Dianna died as a result of multiple injuries, the primary injury being a large wound at the front of her neck that severed her carotid artery. She had numerous injuries to her head, limbs, and torso, including a fractured nose and broken ribs. It was obvious she fought her attacker. Based on autopsy and bloodstain evidence, the attacker attacked Richard as he entered the kitchen. The bloodstains in the kitchen were consistent with the killer conducting a controlled attack, while Richard was lying on the floor. It was concluded that Richard died of multiple sharp force injuries. There were over 100 sharp force injuries on Richard's body that were characterized as a mixture of slash wounds, stab wounds, and chop wounds. Some of the stab wounds were severe, and some were superficial. There were no injuries on Richard's hands that were consistent with defensive injuries, except for a wound on the back of his left arm. Blood and DNA, matching the profiles of both victims, was identified on the hatchet found in the front yard of the residence, and DNA found on the knife outside would match the DNA found underneath Dianna Mah-Jones' fingernails. Right away, police suspected this was a random murder. The couple was loved by friends, family, and co-workers. They didn't have any enemies, and the crime was brutal. Nothing about it made any sense. This meant the case would be more difficult to solve, so the police immediately appealed to the public for help.
This afternoon, I'm just going to go over some additional information we have to share about Wednesday's double homicide. Vancouver police are working to establish a motive in Wednesday's double homicide. Vancouver police are working to establish a motive in Wednesday's double homicide. And out of an abundance of caution, we're reminding the public to remain vigilant and report suspicious behavior to police. Police have identified the victims as a married couple, 65-year-old Dianna Mah-Jones and her husband Richard Jones, 68, both of Vancouver. Detectives have not yet confirmed that this incident was targeted or if it was random. This investigation remains a top priority for the VPD, and our investigators are working around the clock. Not just our investigators, we've got lots of resources out there, and everyone's chipping in and doing the best to find a motive for this crime and to solve it and to bring those responsible to justice. Anyone who may have information about these deaths is asked to call the Vancouver Police Homicide Unit at 604-717-2500 or Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477. And I'll do my best to address any questions.
What factor is playing into your investigation in terms of them having an Airbnb in the basement? Are you looking into that? Do you know whether or not they were renting it out at the time?
We're looking at everything. We're looking at all possibilities. Like I said, at this point, we don't have absolute motive. We can't say for sure that this was a random attack or it was targeted. So out of an abundance of caution, we're asking the public to remain vigilant, report any suspicious activity to police immediately.
The next day, the couple's car was located near Cartier Street and Park Drive, less than 1 kilometer away from the murder. The couple also ran an Airbnb suite out of their basement. It was investigated for possible connections, but nothing came of it. On October 3rd, 1 week after the murders, police requested dashcam footage from anyone who lived in the area. They were also looking for anyone who might have noticed items left near the scene. A newspaper carrier would eventually come forward and tell police he saw both a hatchet and a starfrit knife on the lawn of the Jones residence when he was delivering newspapers at 4 a.m. on September 27th. But at the time, didn't think this was suspicious. Hundreds of hours of security footage from both residents and businesses in the area, as well as dashcam footage, would be handed over from concerned community members. This was a neighborhood where violent murders didn't typically occur. Police work, as well as technology, would piece together the last few hours of the couple's lives. On September 26, Dianna went to work as usual, before returning home again, and then going to a dance class, and then to Costco. Her next-door neighbor, Emma, would later say that she saw Richard and Dianna talking in their backyard between 5:15 and 5:30. Shortly afterwards, Richard would be recorded on surveillance video between 5:56 and 6:43. Dianna would also be recorded on surveillance video, getting into her car after her dance class at 7:08, and then she would be seen shopping at Costco in Richmond. She would also be spotted on surveillance video as she approached and parked in front of her residence at 8:01 p.m. Several hours later, at 10:24 p.m., Dianna's vehicle would be seen on CCTV footage driving away from the Jones residence and parking about 1 kilometer away. Police would later discover the keys to Dianna's vehicle, concealed in a garden nearby where the vehicle was parked. Captured on CCTV footage was a man walking in the area a few blocks away from where the Kia Soul was disposed of. He was wearing a jacket and carrying a backpack. Police would follow his movements by obtaining more footage from businesses and residents in the area. The hatchet used in the murder still had the barcode attached, so police were able to trace the purchase of the hatchet, as well as the baseball hat found at the scene, to a local Canadian Tire store. On September 13, 2017, 2 weeks before the murders, the same man who was seen walking away from Dianna's vehicle was caught on CCTV footage purchasing a hatchet, baseball cap, and gloves. Police would match the timestamp on the video with the bank card used for the purchase. Their suspect's name was Rocky Rambo Wei Nam Cam. And no, that is not a nickname. That was the name his parents gave him. Apparently his father is a big fan of Sylvester Stallone movies. In September of 2017, Rocky was 25 years old. He was raised in Hong Kong, and after graduating high school, moved to Calgary to attend university and obtained a Bachelor of Economics degree. His hobbies were playing video games and reading online comic books. After graduation, he would apply for jobs in Calgary, but was unable to find employment. In June of 2017, Rocky would move to Vancouver and live in a hostel, before moving into a rooming house at 7608 Granville Street, which was only a 2-minute walk from where Dianna's car was found and a 12-minute walk from the murder scene. To help pay the bills, Cam would play video games online competitively. Cam lived with a roommate who described him as soft-spoken and unassuming. Up until this point, Rocky wasn't on the police's radar at all. He was relatively unknown to them. His record was pretty much clean, with the exception of a motor vehicle accident in 2017. Rocky was then put under surveillance, and a plan was set up to get his DNA, although in the end, that wouldn't be so difficult. A female undercover officer would approach Rocky and ask for his help to open a bottle of water. He took the bottle, opened it, and handed it back to her. When DNA results came back, they perfectly matched the DNA found underneath Dianna's fingernails. Rocky would then be picked up by police and brought in for questioning. If you'd like to watch the entire interrogation video, it is on YouTube. I will link it down below, but it is painfully long, over 9 hours, and incredibly boring. And quite honestly, Rocky doesn't say very much.
So I'm gonna get some sandwiches going. So do you have any understanding of why you're here today?
Yeah.
Yeah, what's your understanding of the reason you're here today?
They said I'm under arrest for 2 counts of murder.
Yeah, do you know anything about that?
The name of it.
Do you know those people? No, you don't know them. Okay, good. Well, that's good to know. Have you heard about anything about this in the news or anything like that?
I don't watch news.
Oh, you know. That's smart because the news will get you depressed for sure. Do you recognize those folks?
I have nothing to say.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have nothing to say.
Okay. All right. So with regard to these people, are they familiar or neighborly with you?
I don't want to talk about it.
Okay. So obviously this brings up something emotional for you, Rocky. You seem...
I don't have nothing to say.
Okay. So, one thing that I was going to show you. This is a ball cap. Have you ever seen that before?
Maybe.
Tell me about it.
I don't know.
I mean, it's an important thing. If you have owned a hat like that, I'd love to know about that.
I don't want to talk about it.
Okay. Let's talk about that axe.
I don't want to talk about it.
But that's not the one we found at the scene. What's underneath of here, Rocky, is a serial number. So what our investigators did, because this was left at the scene, not this one, but the one that you used. And there was a serial number on that, which is what led us to you. So then we went back and found this purchase, and we have your face at the till buying that hatchet and that hat and those gloves. I noticed, there you are. And I also noticed your backpack. So I want you to know, Rocky, this was a key thing for us. Because once we had that hatchet and it had that serial number, this is an interesting bit of video here too, because here you're looking at the knives, right? Were you looking at knives for some other reason, for cooking or something? Rocky?
I don't want to talk about it.
So yeah, Canadian Tire was quite helpful to us because they, you know, once we had the serial number off that hatchet, they were able to direct us right to this video here, Rocky. And they gave us the transaction right here that was related to that purchase. I want to be really clear with you too, Rocky, that we don't need you to say anything, you know. Like, this is it. You're going to be charged with 2 counts of murder. Is there any reason why you'd be driving that woman's car?
I have nothing to say.
Well, I'd sure like an explanation for it, Rocky, because it's obvious what's happened, and there's just no reason why And this is obviously something that you'd thought about for a while. And I don't know why it happened. And I'm super interested in that. What these reports basically say is that when Mrs. Mah-Jones was taken to the autopsy, what they did is they took fingernail clippings from her fingers. And then what they did is they did a DNA analysis under her fingernails. And so what they found was a male profile. So our clever investigators spot you. And where did you go? But you went to the Bank of Montreal. So, of course, as soon as you left, they go right in there, capture your image again, and capture your name. And so now we knew who you were. And so now we're still setting surveillance to try to find out where you live. So eventually, of course, they just followed you back to your house. So now we know who you are. We know where you live. If something happened between you and him and she walked in on it, because I know that's how it happened, I know she came home with the groceries and pow, I think she was unexpected to you. I don't think you meant to hurt her. Everybody knows that you went in there. Everybody knows that you went into that store 2 weeks before and bought what we call as a kill kit. Without an explanation from you, that's a kill kit. You know, Rocky, I can sit there and I can feel that you are feeling something. Maybe today you're not ready to talk about the whole ugly story, but at least say you're sorry. For what? You're an animal.
After he was arrested, Rocky's glasses would be seized, and a small drop of dried blood that matched Dianna's DNA profile would be found in the hinge of the glasses. This investigation involved more than 240 officers canvassing over 1,000 homes and businesses. Hundreds of hours of surveillance video would be examined, and the total cost to taxpayers would be $600,000. I'm not sure how he thought he would beat these charges, since his DNA was literally underneath the victim's fingernails, but Rocky would plead not guilty. As the trial began, Rocky acknowledged he was the one who killed Dianna and Richard Mah-Jones. He really didn't have a choice. The DNA plus the surveillance video evidence proved that Rocky was the killer beyond a reasonable doubt. At issue was whether or not the Crown could prove his intent for the murder, and that the murder itself was planned and deliberate. Both of these are required in order to convict someone of first-degree murder. Rocky would only say that he was guilty of manslaughter for each victim. The defense would try to say that Rocky was in an altered mental state at the time of the killing and lacked the specific intent for murder, and said that he didn't appreciate the nature of his acts or the consequences of them. And then Rocky would take the stand in his own defense. On the stand, Rocky would admit to everything. He testified he purchased the items found at the scene at Canadian Tire. This included the hatchet, the baseball hat, twine, and starfruit knife. Although he also told the court it was difficult to say why he purchased these items. He would place all of these items in his backpack, apparently to organize his room, but also to make his backpack heavier for exercising. He told the court that he always took his backpack with him when he went out, which is why these items were with him when he attacked Richard and Dianna. And he also had the starfruit knife in the pocket of his hoodie because he didn't want his housemates to use it. Rocky would tell the court that he was walking in the Marpole area between 7:30 and 8 p.m. when he saw Dianna stop her car and take some groceries into the house. Dianna had left the trunk open, so he knew she was coming back. After he spotted her, Rocky hid behind a tree, put down his backpack, and armed himself with his hatchet and knife. After Dianna collected her groceries and was walking towards the house, Rocky charged towards her and forced his way inside. And when he got in the house, there was a moment of silence before Dianna started yelling for help. Rocky testified that he dropped the pocket knife and put his hand over her mouth. When Dianna didn't stop yelling, Rocky moved his hand onto her throat to try and silence her. And when that didn't work, Rocky put down his hatchet and used both hands to choke her. After Dianna stopped struggling, Rocky picked up the knife and stabbed her with it. Although later in his testimony, he said he couldn't remember whether he stabbed Dianna after he choked her or after he killed Richard. But he would admit under cross-examination that the reason he stabbed Dianna was to make sure she was dead. Shortly afterwards, Rocky heard some sounds from the back of the house, so he went towards the noise and hid behind some stairs leading off from the kitchen. When Richard walked in, Rocky attacked him at the entrance to the kitchen and stabbed him with the knife. But even after stabbing Richard multiple times, he wasn't dead, at least not yet. The court was stunned when Rocky testified that at one point he wondered, quote, how come he didn't die? And that at one point, Richard tried to stand up. Rocky would push Richard back down to the kitchen floor and continue the attack, telling the court that the reason he kept stabbing Richard was that he wasn't dying. After stabbing Richard multiple times, Rocky went to the living room to get the hatchet, and according to court records, Rocky chopped Richard in the neck. Rocky then closed the blinds in the kitchen and unscrewed the kitchen light so people could not look in and see the blood and the bodies. He then dragged both bodies from the kitchen to the bathroom. Most killers don't stick around very long after a murder, but after dragging both bodies to the bathroom, Rocky walked around the house. He found $30 in the guest bedroom and a set of keys. He drank some milk from the refrigerator because he was thirsty and ate a peach. He then moved both of their bodies into the shower area, turned on the water, and closed the shower door. But Rocky still wasn't done. He collected some random items including bananas, paper towels, car keys, and some items he found in Richard and Dianna's pockets and put them in a grocery bag. And then he packed his hoodie and some peaches into his backpack. In total, Rocky Rambo Wei Nam Cam would spend 2 hours and 23 minutes in the Mah-Jones residence after committing the murders. Cam would leave their house by the back door and walk towards Dianna's vehicle. As he was leaving, he saw a woman walking by and hid in some bushes because he didn't want her to see him. But he failed to notice that both the hatchet and the knife fell on the ground as he was leaving the house. He then told the court that he stole Dianna's car because it was there and he didn't want to walk home. He then stopped at a dumpster and threw out a number of items, including the shopping bag containing some of the items he had taken from the Jones residence. Cam then drove north and parked Dianna's Kia at the 7700 block of Cartier Street. From there, Rocky got out of the vehicle, began to walk north, and tossed Dianna's car keys into a garden. His entire route from start to finish was recorded on video surveillance. Rocky would testify that when he got home, he noticed his hoodie was bloodied, so he put it into the backpack with his other clothes and threw the backpack into his neighbor's dumpster. He then went to bed and apparently had no trouble sleeping that night. The next day, he heard some sirens and looked on the internet to see if there was any news about the killings, but couldn't find any. Rocky testified that after checking the news, he didn't think about the fact that he killed 2 people until he was arrested. He continued to insist throughout the trial that he didn't plan to hurt anyone when he went out for an evening walk on September 26, despite having a backpack full of weapons, twine, gloves, and spare clothing. He said he was carrying these items to weigh down his backpack to give him a better workout during his walk, because these are totally normal items to use during a workout. During cross-examination, the Crown didn't directly ask Rocky if he thought it was all part of a video game, but did ask, quote, when you're playing those games, part of the game doesn't involve torturing victims, does it? The Crown would claim that Rocky disposed of the bloody clothes, the backpack, and a pocket knife in several dumpsters after the killings to discard of important evidence linking him to the crime. According to the prosecution, this proved he knew what he was doing and wanted to cover his tracks. The prosecution also accused Rocky of intentionally placing the victims in the shower to wash away any DNA evidence. Dr. Shen, an expert in clinical psychology, testified and provided an opinion about Rocky's possible state of mind at the time of the killing. It's important to note, though, that Dr. Shen is not an expert in forensic psychology. Dr. Shen would interview Rocky on 5 occasions before his trial, and during 3 of those sessions, Dr. Shen and Rocky discussed the killing. It was here he admitted to Dr. Shen that he was responsible for killing Dianna and Richard, but was not able to give any reasons for killing them. Dr. Shen would testify there was no evidence that Rocky suffered from any amnesia during the killings, as he was able to tell Dr. Shen the step-by-step progression of the murders. Rocky told Dr. Shen that he was aware of what he was doing at the time, and also said that he entered the house wanting to kill her, referring to Dianna. And then Dr. Shen told the court that Rocky was possibly in an altered state which he described as gaming consciousness when he killed Richard and Dianna. In Dr. Shen's opinion, Cam's history of isolating himself and immersing himself in fantasy in the form of video games and comic books could have loosened his perception of where reality begins and ends. The term gaming consciousness is not a scientific or commonly accepted term, and was not a diagnosis, but rather a term Dr. Shen used as a descriptor, except that Dr. Shen was unable to identify any triggers that caused Rocky to enter into an altered or gaming consciousness, and was unable to form an opinion about where it began or ended. And Dr. Shen was also not aware of any other cases which people had enacted violence from gaming consciousness. In other words, gaming consciousness is just a made-up term. And although Dr. Shen had access to psychological tests for personality disorders, including psychopathy, anxiety, and depression, he did not administer any of these tests to Rocky. Dr. Shen also didn't watch or hear Rocky's interrogation video by the police. He didn't interview anyone close to Rocky, nor did he review any crime scene photographs or the autopsy report. The only details Dr. Shen had about the murders were from defense counsel and Rocky's description of what he did. In the end, though, there was just so much evidence, between the DNA analysis and the CCTV footage, as well as Rocky's own words on the stand where he testified he meant to kill both victims. Remember, the Crown must prove the murder was both planned and deliberate for a first-degree murder conviction. The Crown concluded that planning and deliberation could be found in Rocky's trips to Canadian Tire, during which he purchased the tools he used in the killings. There were also multiple Google searches for stun guns and drugs that cause unconsciousness, and the fact he stopped at his house shortly before the killing to change his footwear and retrieve his backpack containing the weapons and other items he used, as well as the method of the killings. Rocky Rambo Wei Cam would be found guilty by British Columbia Supreme Court Justice Laura Garreau, who would determine that little or no weight should be given to the testimony of Dr. Shen, the clinical psychologist who suggested that gaming consciousness altered Rocky's state of mind. Rocky would then be sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 25 years. The prosecution had asked for 50 years before he could apply for parole, but Garreau found that sentence to be unduly long and harsh. She described the crimes as extremely disturbing, but said no evidence had been presented that suggested a longer sentence was necessary to protect the public. I would argue that a man walking around with a backpack full of weapons hunting random victims needed to be locked up for life, but that's just one person's opinion. Garreau also noted that just because Cam is eligible for parole doesn't mean he'll be granted parole. A number of victim impact statements were filed with the court. Dianna was one of 4 sisters. She was described as a vibrant, fun-loving individual who contributed much to the community through her work as an occupational therapist and a volunteer. Richard Jones was described as a warm, kind, generous man. Their families reported that since the murders, they had suffered from deep sadness and anxiety, including concerns about their own safety. As for the true motive for the murders, only Rocky knows, and he's not talking. The only theory that makes any sense is he is a deeply disturbed individual who wanted to kill just for the thrill of it. Hopefully, he will never be released. Thank you so much for watching and taking the time to hang out with me today. If you enjoyed learning about this case, please be sure to like and subscribe. If there's a case you would like me to cover in a future video, let me know in the comments section down below. To support my channel, you can go to Buy Me a Coffee if you would like to donate. Thanks again, and I will see you next time.